Hello, this is Dana and welcome to the Orchid Hut. Today is another One Thing You Need to Know video for new orchid growers in particular. The first orchid that I want to show you is this Phalaenopsis. It was featured in a previous video where I talked about how it got the damage to its leaves. So if you're interested in that, I will link that video down below in the description. But today what we're going to be talking about is how this orchid was potted when I received it from the grower. Now, this was an online purchase, and oftentimes when you get orchids from your supermarket or your local garden center, or even if you order them online like this one, you will find that they are potted completely in sphagnum moss. Now, this is something that growers do because it helps them keep the orchid roots hydrated. And if the orchids are going to be shipped to a home grower or to someone else that's going to sell the orchid, it keeps the orchid from being dehydrated. However, for a home grower, you probably do not want to keep your Phalaenopsis orchid in solid sphagnum moss. And in my environment particularly, which is extremely humid, this would just never work because the roots are going to suffocate and eventually die. And you can even see on this orchid that even some of the outer roots are no longer alive. Many of them have turned brown. There's probably a bit of mold in here that would eventually become a huge problem. So one of the things that I did when I received this orchid is I immediately pulled it out of the pot that it was in, and when I water it, I make sure not to completely saturate all of this because the sphagnum moss on the inside will stay really wet. And I have been really careful how I've been watering this to not make the situation worse until I have an opportunity to repot it in the bark that I grow my Phalaenopsis orchids in. Now, one other little trick that I want to show you, because sometimes orchids are received inside a very tight plastic pot inside another pot, like this one. So they're very, very cheap, flexible plastic pots that allow no air whatsoever to get to the roots. And inside is tightly compacted sphagnum moss. This to me is just a recipe for disaster. So when I receive an orchid like this, and until I have a chance to repot it, I will cut this plastic pot away and I will pull it down away from the roots so that these roots can begin to get a bit more air. And when I water it, again, I'm extremely careful not to oversaturate it because the inside of that sphagnum moss will just stay far too wet. And over time, as I'm getting closer and closer to repotting the orchid, I will pull this plastic down a bit more and a bit more so that those roots have an opportunity to adjust. Sometimes I will also begin to slightly pick away some of the extra moss so that the roots can get more air. That's probably what I will be doing with this orchid shortly. And then I put it back in its other little plastic pot with that flexible plastic pulled down so that there's a little bit more aeration happening. Now, one more example, very, very similar. This was a mini Phalaenopsis planted inside a pot. And again, what I did so that this could start adjusting is I cut down on the plastic pot, and I've been letting it sit inside its other little pot folded down like that. And in fact, this one has come completely out, so I may as well just take this very, very cheap little plastic pot and just throw that away. And again, watering it very carefully, and it can just sit down inside this other little pot until I have a chance to repot it so that it has an opportunity to dry out a little bit. So something to watch for when you purchase orchids, and think about your environment and how humid it is. Think about how you're watering these orchids in the meantime until you have an opportunity to repot them. Thanks for watching. If you learned something from this video or enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe. 3 Phalaenopsis orchids from my collection were featured in today's One Thing You Need to Know video. A Friend's Princess, Sweetie Cat, which is in spike for the first time, and Young Home Sun-Kissed Mini. Click that subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen.